love.
What's up mga Kokote? It's me, Kuya Jet. Welcome sa Quadernos, wherein learning is the name of the game. At kung bago ka pa lang sa aming YouTube channel, pindutin mo ng subscribe, like, and share button para maging updated ka sa aming videos. What's up mga Kokote, and welcome to the 21st Century Literature class. At the end of the lesson, you will learn these 4 concepts. Here are the 4 concepts in learning with the 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. So the first concept, comparing and contrasting the different literatures of the Philippines from the pre-colonial to the 21st century in terms of its genre structures and elements. So the second concept is to be familiar with the authors from different regions and their contributions to the Philippine literature, as we will give emphasis to the region 4A, or the Calabarzon region. The third concept is comparing and contrasting the various literary genres and their structure, elements, and tradition from across the globe, most especially from Asia, North America, Europe, Latin America, and Africa. Lastly, the fourth concept, identifying literature in the 21st century and appreciating the role of technology in sharing the literature in the 21st century. As we go along with our discussion, we will encounter 3 learning outcomes. The first learning outcome is to trace the developmental underpinning of the Philippine literature. Second, determine and highlight the various literary forms prevailed in every period in the history of the country. And lastly, is to establish genuine interest to explore the literary wonders of the Philippines. So are you ready? If you're ready now, kindly comment down below so I can know. As of the moment, I have the timeline of the Philippine literature before the 21st century. So first of all, we have the pre-colonial. Second is the Spanish colonization. Third is the period of Enlightenment. Fourth is the American colonization. Fifth is the initial autonomy. Sixth is the Japanese colonization. And lastly is the post-war. So we have 7 periods as the timeline of the Philippine literature starts. I hope you will be able to appreciate our history and literature at the end of our discussion. So let's start with our first topic, which is the pre-colonial, which started from before Christ up to 1564. So what is the characteristic of the pre-colonial literature? So it is based on oral tradition. The literature has been passed through word of mouth from one generation to the next generation. Elders and parents serve as teachers for the ethnic groups. Another characteristics of this literature under the pre-colonial, it has accrued in ideology and phraseology, meaning the body of beliefs and principles belong to the specific of individuals. In terms of its literacy, our ancestors and forebears have already created and developed their own forms of literature even before the foreign occupation. So there are 4 literary forms included in the pre-colonial period, and that includes the oral literature. Under oral literatures, we have the riddles, proverbs, and tanaga. Riddles are buktong in Tagalog. That includes questions that you need to answer. And proverbs are saliwikain in Tagalog that includes a life lesson. And next we have tanaga that is expressed more emotionally than proverbs. Second one is folk songs. Before, folk songs is being used in order to express one's thought and feelings. Like for example, we have hele or yayi in order to sleep a baby. Tagay or drinking that is used by our Visayan region or Cebuano friends. Or drinking in English. And then we have the kanogan and ambahan from different more ethnic groups. Third one is folk tales. In folk tales, we have myths, legends, fables, fantastic stories. In myths, wherein the god and goddesses are the characters that expresses a unique power and also teaches a life lesson. Also, legends expresses an origin of something. And fables, wherein the animals were the characters in the story that also teaches a life lesson. And then fantastic stories that include kapre, tiyanak, manananggal, and other superstitious characters. And then lastly, we have epics. In epic, we can include Biyag ni Lamang, Kudaman, Hinilawod, Darangen that includes Filipino characters that expresses a unique and strong powers. Let's now proceed to the second period in the timeline of our Philippine literature, which is the Spanish colonization on 1565 up to 1872, which is the longest period in our Philippine literature. So what is the characteristics of Spanish colonization. First of all, it has two distinct classifications, the religious and the secular. Second, it introduced Spanish as the medium of communication. Spaniards introduced to us many religious activities in our country. Spaniards introduced to us religious literature and secular literature as their literary forms. For religious literature, we can include Passion and Cenaculo, that is merely happening every mahal na araw. And then secular literature, which is awit, corrido, and prose narrative. For awit, we can say that the masterpiece of Francisco Balagtas, which is Florentine Laura, is an example of this literature. And for corrido, we can say that Ibong Adarna is the example of this literature. We proceed on the period of Enlightenment happened on 1872 up to the year of 1896. And the Revolutionary period happened on 1896 up to 1900s. So what are the characteristics of these periods? So it planted seeds of nationalism in Filipinos. Second, language shifted from Spanish to Tagalog. And lastly, it addresses the mass instead of intelligentsia. So what are the literary forms under the period of Enlightenment and Revolutionary period? So, first of all, we have propaganda literature. Under propaganda literature, we have political essay. For example of this is Jarong Tagalog and La Solidaridad. And another one is political novels, and for an example of this, we have No Limitang Here and El Filibusterismo, that is very famous on our national hero, Dr. C. Rizal. Second literary forms is revolutionary literature. Under this, we have political essay as well, and for an example, we have Kalayaan. And second, we have poetry, or for example, we have True Decalogue, Katapusang Hibik ng Pilipinas, at Liwanag sa Dilim. We now proceed on the American colonization that happened on 1900s up to 1942. So what are the characteristics under American colonization? So American colonization is divided into two sub-periods. First of all, we have the period of apprenticeship that happened last 1910 up to 1930 in the time of Americans. And then we have the period of emergence that happened on 1920 to 1930 during the American colonization. So what are the literary forms brought us by the period of apprenticeship and the period of emergence during the American colonization? So for the period of apprenticeship, we have the short stories. For examples, we have Dead Stars by Paz Marquez Benitez, The Key by Paz La Torena, The Footnote to Youth by Jose Garcia Villa, and then for the second literary forms brought by the period of apprenticeship is novels. For example, we have The Childe of Sorrow by Zolio Gala. And for the period of emergence, we have one, short stories. For example, it is The Poet of the Century by Jose Garcia Villa. Let's move on to the next period, which is the period of initial autonomy that happened last 1935 up to the year of 1942. So what are the characteristics under the period of initial autonomy? So the period of initial autonomy, works perceived to be of no value were eliminated. And then, second, the comparison between the urban and rural living became a common focus in most texts. So what are the literary forms that is being passed or that is being introduced to us? So first of all, we have poetry. So the period of initial autonomy introduced the use of free verse and modern themes when writing poems. Second and last, we have the foreign films. So the period of initial autonomy introduced to us the use of foreign films. Let's now proceed to the sixth period in the timeline of our Philippine literature before the 21st century, and that's Japanese colonization that happened on the year of 1942 up to 1950. So what are the characteristics under Japanese colonization? So Japanese colonization is a period of maturity and originality. So it served as a golden years for short stories and Tagalog dramas. So what are the literary forms under the Japanese colonization? So first of all, we have the Tanaga by Ildefonso Santos. Second, we have short stories For an example, we have the Lupang Tinubuan by Narciso Reyes and Dugo at Utak by Cornelio S. Reyes. So in this period, we also have a new form of writing poem in poetry. So we have haiku and tanka. We now arrive in the last period in the timeline of our Philippine literature before the 21st century, and that is the period of the post-war, or the period of the Philippine Republic, happened on the last years of 1946 up to 1972. So what are the characteristics under the post-war period and the period of the Philippine Republic? So it has social issues and domestic conditions were mostly revealed. So there are new themes, styles, and techniques were considered on this period. So what are the literary forms that is being introduced to us by the post-war period or the period of the Philippine Republic? So there are three literary forms. First of all, we have the commercial magazines, next is journals, and lastly, the revolutionary poems. This lesson concludes that there is a change or upgrade in every period of our Philippine literature as long as it can fit in our generation. As we can see, most of our Filipino heroes such as Dr. Rizal, our national hero, had maximized the use of Philippine literacy in order to communicate, to share, to document, and to record their experiences from the happening that happened on their time and period. And that's it. As we end our lesson, I hope that you appreciate the history and literature of the Philippines from the past up to now. And that ends our lesson about the literature of the Philippines across time under the 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. So thank you very much. Always keep safe and God bless you all.
Look.